Imagine waking up one morning to find that the very place you call home is no longer yours to control. Rules you never agreed to, fines you never earned, strangers standing on your lawn, telling you what you can and cannot do. That's what happened when the neighborhood HOA decided my property was theirs to police. But when they crossed one line too many, I realized they had no idea who they were dealing with. So the question is, how far would you go to take your home back? When I first moved into the neighborhood, I thought I had found peace. The street was lined with tall, swaying oaks that cast long afternoon shadows across neatly kept lawns. Children pedaled bikes past the cul-de-sac. Neighbors waved in the evenings, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had landed in a place I could finally call home. My house wasn't the biggest on the block, but it was mine. A quiet porch where I could sip coffee, a small garden where I could grow tomatoes and herbs, and a backyard wide enough for my dog to run free. It felt simple. It felt safe. I didn't move here for extravagance. I moved here for stability, for community, for the kind of life that didn't keep you awake at night. And for a while, it really was that way. The neighbors were polite, the mail always arrived on time, and the only sound at night was the distant hum of crickets. It was ordinary, and ordinary was exactly what I wanted. But sometimes, ordinary comes with fine print. And in this neighborhood, the fine print was something called the Homeowners Association. At first, I barely noticed it. Letters arrived in the mail welcoming me. Newsletters showed up tucked under my door, and small notices reminded residents about community standards. It all felt harmless, almost background noise. I even laughed at some of the rules. No lawn ornaments taller than 3 feet. No vehicles parked in the driveway overnight. No curtains visible from the street unless they were white or beige. Strict, yes, but none of it seemed to touch me directly. So I told myself it was nothing to worry about. But rules are never really about what's written on paper. They're about the people enforcing them. And in this neighborhood, the HOA board wasn't just a group of volunteers looking out for the community. They were watchful eyes behind closed blinds. They were clipboards at block parties. They were whispers passed along the sidewalk, carefully disguised as casual conversation. The HOA wasn't about order. It was about control. At first, I ignored it. But then came the first letter addressed to me directly. A reminder about the length of my grass. A notice that my garbage bins had been visible for too long. Harmless on their own, maybe. But the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't neighborly. It was a warning. Looking back now, those little notes were the opening moves of a much bigger game. Because soon, the HOA wasn't just telling me how to trim my lawn or where to put my trash. They were preparing to stake a claim far deeper, far more personal, and far more dangerous than I could have imagined. At first, I tried to brush it off. After all, it was just a letter about grass, right? Everyone gets reminders now and then. But when the second notice arrived, this time with a fine attached, I felt that first twinge of unease. $50 for grass that was barely an inch taller than their acceptable limit. So, I paid it. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want trouble. But giving in once only taught them that I could be pushed. And once an HOA knows you'll fold, they don't stop. The next letter came just a week later. This time they claimed my garbage bins were visible for too long after pickup day. Another fine, $75. A week after that, I was fined for having a non-approved garden fixture. It was a small wooden trellis supporting tomato plants in my backyard. It wasn't visible from the street, but somehow they knew it was there. Someone had been watching. That was the first moment I realized this wasn't about rules. This was personal. And it didn't stop at letters. One evening, I came home to find an HOA board member, clipboard in hand, standing in my driveway, jotting down notes about my car. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled that tight-lipped, condescending smile and told me my vehicle might not meet community standards. The harassment became routine. Notes on my door, calls to my phone, neighbors suddenly avoiding eye contact, whispers just loud enough for me to hear. Doesn't follow the rules, making the place look bad. I began to feel trapped in my own home. Every morning I'd peek out the window, half expecting to see another board member patrolling the block. Every evening, I'd wonder what little detail they'd use against me next. But then came the letter that pushed me over the edge. This time, it wasn't a fine. It was a demand. They wanted me to tear down my garden, the little patch of earth I had poured myself into, the one place that still felt like mine. They claimed it violated landscaping standards, even though nowhere in the handbook did it say vegetable gardens weren't allowed. I knew then this was about control. So I did the one thing they never expected. I fought back. At first, it was small acts of resistance. I refused to pay the garden fine. I sent letters back, demanding proof. I filed every threat neatly in a binder, labeled and dated. But if I thought standing my ground would scare them off, I was wrong. The fines grew larger. The letters became harsher. One morning, I found a bright orange notice taped to my door, a formal warning of legal action. And then came the worst blow. My garden was destroyed. The trellis snapped, tomatoes crushed, plants ripped from the soil. It was deliberate. It was personal. The police shrugged it off as a civil matter. To me, it was war. So I dug deeper. I researched the HOA itself, where the money went, who ran it, what power they actually had. And that's when I found it. Corruption. The board members weren't just nosy neighbors. They were profiting. Fines like mine weren't about rules. They were revenue. Thousands of dollars collected each month, funneled into maintenance projects that never happened. But the board members' homes, perfectly manicured, freshly renovated. Suddenly, it all made sense. I wasn't just a target. I was their cash cow. And I decided right then that I would not be their victim. I thought I had seen the worst. But then came the foreclosure notice, in thick, bold print, stamped with the HOA's seal. It declared that if I didn't comply with their demands, they would begin foreclosure on my home. They weren't just trying to control me anymore. They were trying to take everything I owned. So I did what they never expected. I made everything public. At the next community meeting, I laid it all out. Every letter, every fine, every photo of my destroyed garden. And finally, the foreclosure notice itself. Neighbors leaned forward. Whispers spread. For the first time, people weren't looking at me with suspicion. They were looking at the board with doubt. And then it happened. One neighbor spoke up, then another and another. Voices rose, one after the other, revealing they too had been targeted. Wind chimes, driveways, paint colors. The board's pattern of harassment wasn't isolated, it was systematic. The president banged his gavel, shouting for order. But the illusion of control had shattered. I dropped the final bombshell. I had already filed complaints with the Attorney General and consulted a lawyer. The room erupted. People shouted, demanded resignations, demanded records. And then the impossible happened. Applause. It started with a few claps, hesitant but real. Then louder, stronger, until the entire room was on its feet, cheering. The board members sat frozen, powerless, red-faced, cornered. Their empire crumbled right in front of the very people They thought they controlled. But even in victory I knew. Power doesn't surrender quietly. And they weren't finished. Not yet. Within a week, I received another letter. Venom thinly disguised as formality. They accused me of inciting hostility, threatened more legal action. But this time, I wasn't alone. Neighbors began reaching out, sharing their own stories. We formed a group, compared documents, pooled money for a lawyer, and demanded financial records. The truth spilled out fast. Missing money, hypocrisy, corruption. And then came the recall vote. The room was packed. Dozens of homeowners filled every seat. When the ballots were counted, every single board member was voted out. Not a close call, a landslide. A new board was elected. Not perfect, but honest. Fines were reviewed, bogus charges erased, finances opened for all to see. Slowly, the neighborhood began to feel like a community again. For me, the impact was simple. I got my home back. But there were scars. The garden never looked the same. Some neighbors never met my eyes again. The betrayal lingered. And yet, there was pride. Because I had stood up. I had refused to bend. And in doing so, I turned fear into defiance, isolation into solidarity. I didn't just save my home. I gave my neighborhood a chance to breathe again. And if there's one thing I'll never forget, it's this. Power only works if you let it. So the next time someone tells you can't grow a garden, hang a curtain, or paint your fence, ask yourself this. Are they protecting the community or protecting their control? And more importantly, what would you do if they came for your home?